Hello and welcome to episode 266 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. How are you, Ian?
I'm well, Jason. How are you, sir?
Good. I'm good. It's been a quick week, not a ton of news, but we've got a very interesting story to start off with. But first of all, how are you? What else is going on?
I'm well. We're getting into it's officially spring. The windows are open in the house. The backyard is ready to be used. It's no longer the barren wasteland of winter. So I'm excited about that.
That's nice.
We're into May, which is nice, doing some traveling this month. So we'll have more to say about that later. And if you listened to last week's episode of the podcast, you know that we're giving away a few signed copies of Scott Bateman's forthcoming book, Hercules. And you already know that you can enter to win a few of those copies just by emailing us at podcast@fr24.com and saying, hey, I want to win the book. That's all you have to do. Super simple. You don't have to do anything more than that right now. So this may be the easiest contest you've ever entered in your entire life. And there's still plenty of time to enter to win a signed copy of Scott's book. If you haven't listened to last week's episode, stop now, go back, listen to our interview with Scott about his new book, because it's fascinating, both the book and the conversation with Scott, and then come back and let's talk about some information and news that has happened this week. How's that sound, Jason?
I think that's a plan.
So we go from the Royal Air Force in the UK way, way south to Brazil, because this is some very interesting news. First reported by Andrew Tengel and Benjamin Katz at the Wall Street Journal today, before we recorded.
Amazing.
How about that?
Amazing. Early in the morning even. Gave us hours to digest this news.
We got time to prepare to discuss this. Brazil's Embraer is considering building a new single-aisle 737/A320 sized jet.
Oh boy. I don't know what degree or what level of real this report is. I'm sure Embraer has been kicking the idea around for a long time, possibly ever since, 2020, when Boeing didn't quite stab Embraer in the back, but they did kind of leave them high and dry when they withdrew from the bid to acquire Embraer Commercial Aviation. Kind of left Embraer in a weird place on its own at a time where Bombardier Commercial Aviation was just fully acquired by Airbus. So now you have Embraer out here who's really, really good at what they do, making those regional jets. They're very good at it. I think American CEO recently kind of praised Embraer for being the only manufacturer out there that can actually build planes and deliver them when they're supposed to and say they will deliver it. So good for them. But this could very well be make or break for Embraer. We've seen what happens when other very experienced, very large conglomerates get involved in building an aircraft competing with at least the 737 or A320, and that would be Mitsubishi. That did not go well. Of course, we know from a few weeks ago that has not stopped Japan from giving it another try for some reason.
And they mean business this time.
I'm sure they do. Lessons have been learned. People have been fired. New people have been hired. The new people are probably the same people as the old people, but this time they're going to do it right. This has the potential to be very, very interesting. Of course, nothing Embraer does now will result in you flying on a 200-seat Embraer jet for probably 10 years, give or take.
At least.
At least. There is a lot of time, but if Embraer were to announce now, while Boeing is at the lowest point it ever has been, and Airbus is so delayed with its products being because of manufacturing issues or engines that don't work, not to say Embraer is not also impacted by that, but this would be just a really, I agree with that doorbell. I think that's the perfect emphasis for the importance of this report that Embraer could be doing something extremely interesting. So this report in the Wall Street Journal from Andrew and Benjamin, of course, being the reputable news outlet that it is, they have some commentary from Embraer, and I quote, they say that while the company, and now I begin the quote, certainly has the capability to develop a new narrow-body aircraft, end quote, it doesn't have any plans for a sizable new project at this time and is focused on selling existing models. Of course, Embraer is not going to come out and say, yeah, you got us. We're going to build an A320, 737 competitor. That's never going to happen until if and when they are ready to actually announce that. But they do go on to remind us that Boeing itself doesn't have a plan, or at least we don't know of a plan to replace the 737. We are stuck with the MAX for the foreseeable future at this point. So if Embraer were to start developing a new, larger mainline aircraft for the U.S. operators, they would be presumably ahead of Boeing at this point, and possibly Airbus, probably less convinced on that, but it would be very interesting timing for Embraer to really go after Boeing's throat at this point. I think go right after the bread and butter.
So from what we generally understand about the plans of Boeing and Airbus, Boeing is planning to launch, not field, but launch development of its next generation of aircraft sometime early in the next decade. So in the early 2030s, Boeing will announce what it's going to design and build.
And by that point, Embraer could be well into development of a larger aircraft.
Nearing certification at that point. Oh, that's a little optimistic. But they could be well into development if they decide to do this in the near future. Airbus, for its part, has been targeting 2035 for the next step change narrow body aircraft. So we'll see what comes of that and how that timeline fluctuates over the long term. I mean, we're still, a decade away. But if Embraer did this now, or even soon, that's a pretty big leap for them. But I think, and this is now me putting on my personal hat, I think it's worth it. I mean, they've shown that they can consistently design, develop, and build good airplanes.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody loves the Embraer. Pilots love it. Passengers love it. Everybody loves it. Why not make a bigger aircraft? And it's not to say that any of this would be easy, but why not?
Yeah, it does call into question what Embraer's plans are for things that have already been announced, which would be its Energia, I think it's pronounced, line of concept aircraft. They shifted their focus to hydrogen fuel cell and hybrid electric tech on just 19 to 30 seat aircraft with about a 200 nautical mile range, not a ton. But they moved away from originally announcing, I think, a fully electric aircraft and turbine SAF and a couple things, and they whittled that down to just hybrid electric and fuel cell. But those are small aircraft, smaller than what they currently have, which would be the E170, E190, E2 range, and the E1, begrudgingly, I'm sure at this point still. But what happens to those? Do they still press forward and develop those concept aircraft while potentially also developing a new clean sheet narrow-body aircraft? Does it have the capital and the engineering resources and just the physical space to do both of those at the same time? Or would this hybrid or fuel cell model have to kind of take a back seat for the more practical here and now?
I think that's a really interesting question. Not the least of which is the money obviously is always the major player. But I think that brings up an interesting point about what development resources does Embraer have to do both of those projects, or does one feed the other? I don't know the answer to that. And it sounds like, based on the Wall Street Journal's report, Embraer doesn't yet know the answer to that either, as much as they need to in order to make that decision.
Yeah, it will be expensive. The article says that Embraer has a market value of around $5 billion. However, new aircraft programs typically cost tens of billions of dollars. So it would need to take on, I imagine, quite a large amount of cash to get some sort of program like this off the ground, because Embraer has not designed a fully new clean sheet commercial aircraft in a very long time, unless you somehow consider the E2 that, which I don't think you can. So
it's like a sheet you used and then erased.
Right. You erase some stuff and you reshape the wing a little bit and put a bigger engine on it. That sounds familiar. Not a new concept. But yeah, this could be make or break, because Embraer can't keep making the same E-jets forever. The E2 line has not been wildly successful. The E2 line will probably never be able to operate commercially for the U.S. majors. The scope clauses seemingly never going to change. So if it wants to break higher into the U.S. market and increase sales and really get a foothold with the U.S. major airlines, it's got to do something different. And this might be it, but they need to tread very carefully because this is going to be very expensive. And if they don't do it right, we've seen what happens when it's not done right.
You get sold to Airbus for $1.
Yeah, we didn't really talk about the 220, or I'm sorry, the C series all that much. But yeah, that fate was not too great for Bombardier. $1 for that program. Turned out to be a great airplane.
It did turn out to be a great airplane. And we were just talking about the movie Trading Spaces before we started recording. And the central tenet of the movie is that there's a $1 bet between two of the characters.
That would be Trading Places before you get any hate mail.
What did I say? Trading Spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Trading Places. There you go. Hey, let's leave Brazil and go to India, because this particular bit of news broke right after we recorded.
It was very rude of them, but it's big news, and they gave us some stuff to talk about this week.
So you're welcome, Airbus. I mean, obviously, if we hadn't recorded last week's episode, this order would not have come through.
Never.
But Indigo, famous for the world's largest narrow-body aircraft order in history with 500 aircraft, months later has now ordered 30 with 70 options for the A350.
Ooh, that's a lot of airplane for an airline that has not operated technically any wide-body
yes, technically.
Indigo does have a couple of 777-300ERs in its fleet right now, but those are operated for or on behalf or by Turkish Airlines. I don't know. There's some weird thing going on with that. But Indigo itself is firmly an A320 family aircraft. There is a huge potential for another long-haul Indian airline, and Indigo thinks, why not them?
I mean, those are your options.
Yep.
It's Indigo and Air India. Those are your options as far as financial footing and capability goes. Yeah. And they're going long haul.
Yeah.
And in a big way, starting in 2027.
Yeah. Or whenever these aircraft end up actually getting delivered. But it's going to be very interesting. We have Air India being completely revitalized, but will take years to realize that and get to the point where, I don't know, people can trust them to not be terrible. There is still that chasm between what is the old Air India and the old garbage airplanes and the new airplanes that are nice. It's going to take a very long time to get that brand harmony where you can trust that you're going to get on an Air India aircraft and it's going to be a good experience. And maybe by 2027, 2028, that will be a reality. But Indigo sees space in the market where others have tried and failed throughout the course of this podcast, which is not all that old. We've seen how many Indian airlines come and go, unfortunately.
We haven't even gotten to the Indian airline that's gone later in the episode yet.
We'll get to them.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, there's another Indian airline that's failed in this episode. So, yeah, to your point, I think that this is the only other option as far as this goes. But I think to Indigo's credit, I mean, they've done a very nice job creating a solidly run airline and a good product. And then they said, okay, well, let's carry more people further afield, because India has been Emirates' playground, for lack of a better term, I guess, for a long time. Because, I mean, they dumped a ton of capacity into India. And I think Indigo says, well, we don't need to have people connect through Dubai. We don't need to, always make sure, that they're going on Emirates. We can take some of that traffic.
It can and should.
As to that, Airbus also announced this week that they are raising the A350 production rate up to 12 per month in 2028. This will be kind of an end goal that was the original end goal, because they were already, I think, almost at 10 a month before the pandemic, and then obviously decreased very much. And now they're raising this back up. So by 2028, going to 12 a month, because, who knows, by then Indigo may have ordered another 200 A350s. So we'll see what comes of that.
Yeah, 2028 feels like a long time away, but I guess that really tells you just how long it takes to get the logistics in line to increase the rate, even modestly, of an aircraft production line like that.
Yeah. Let's stick with Airbus and continue to talk about production lines. So we've talked about Boeing and its quest to bring Spirit Aerosystems back into the Boeing fold. What we mentioned a few episodes ago when we talked about this initially is that the wrinkle here is that Spirit Aerosystems also does manufacturing work for Airbus. Spirit produces section 15 of the A350 fuselage, which is the center section of the fuselage that sits above the wing box. And it also builds the wings for the A220 in its Belfast facility. We finally got to hear a little bit from Airbus this week when they discussed their earnings. Airbus CEO Guillaume Faury gave a little bit of his thinking around how Airbus is approaching this. He said that they're going to need to do something about this in the event that Boeing acquires Spirit, which seems near certain at this point. So Airbus is exploring options for these particular work packages, whether or not they become part of Airbus, they get spun off somehow. It'll be interesting to see. But Airbus is confident that whatever work comes from Spirit won't be a Boeing-owned piece of work. As he points out, it seems not a good idea to have your very important manufacturing components come from your direct competitor.
No, this is a very complicated problem that I'm sure nobody at Airbus this time last year would think, this is what I'm going to be dealing with for the rest of my career.
Right.
Yeah, this is tricky.
I think it'll be interesting to follow along whether, I'm not sure Airbus wants to acquire these particular pieces of work, but they might have to.
Given the circumstances, they're probably going to be okay with it.
I mean, I think whatever happens, it'll be just fine. This week, Finnair announced that it is suspending flights to Tartu in Estonia due to GPS interference. Twice in the past week, the flight from Helsinki to Tartu has had to return to Helsinki because of GPS interference. Because the airport itself only has GPS-based arrival procedures. So the standard terminal arrival procedures and the missed approach procedures are GPS only. So if GPS is being jammed or spoofed, they can't land, so they have to go back from whence they came. So now Estonia is basically turning back the clock to figure out non-GPS based approach procedures so that they can still use the airport during GPS jamming.
Okay, that's not great, but it is clearly the realist impact I think we've seen of GPS jamming and interference. In this case, it's not just, oh, the aircraft thinks it's somewhere that it isn't, or the in-flight entertainment map isn't showing an accurate location. This is an entire airport losing service. It's not just Finnair suspending its flights. Finnair was the only airline servicing this airport. So now this city, this airport, has no flights for at least a month, which is not great. I'm sure they'll be able to cook something up here. Looking at the terrain around the airport, there isn't exactly much around it in the way of terrain or mountains or even hills, seemingly. I feel like they'll be able to figure something else out, but must be good times if you're one of the last remaining VOR technicians out there, or ILS technicians or whatever, thinking, yeah, I'm gonna have some job security for a good while, because maybe we shouldn't be retiring things like old VORs when they're seemingly much less susceptible to jamming or anything like GPS. This is going to get worse before it gets better. A lot worse.
Yeah, and the long and the short of it is the comment that the pilots made when we shot the video on the SAS A350. The pilot said, GPS jamming is just very, very annoying when you're in cruise. Because we can use DME, it's fine. It's just annoying. But when it comes to flying at lower altitudes and when you're trying to take off and land, then it becomes an impediment to safe flight and being able to actually continue. And so what do you do with all of this newfound badness in your navigation system? And I think that this is kind of an extreme example because it's such a close proximity to the likely source of the jamming in Russia to learn how to navigate this. But who knows? as this becomes more and more of a problem, as we've seen just in the past few years, is this going to start affecting more aircraft at busier airports?
Yeah, that would not be great. Granted, this airport is within not exactly a stone's throw of Russia, but it's as close to the border as many airports not in Russia will get. But yeah, if I'm Finland, I'm not too pleased about this, or Norway or Sweden. This is going to become very problematic if GPS jamming, spoofing, all of that increases in range and crosses borders. It's not really something that's easily solvable. There really is not a lot of practical solution to this, as we discussed in that interview a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, we'll keep after it and see what we see as things hopefully stop progressing in the wrong direction.
I wouldn't count on that.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to sound a hopeful note.
That's nice.
If you are an aircraft lessor that was leasing aircraft to Indian Airline Go First, you had a good week in court last week. A judge in India has ruled that the aircraft that were leased to Go First can be deregistered and returned to the lessors.
Hey, that sounds like good news, but I feel like there's a but coming.
There's a big, big but. Those planes aren't going anywhere anytime soon.
But why?
So let's talk about what the legal case was, because this is actually pretty interesting. In aviation law, there is the Cape Town Convention and Protocol, technically known as the Convention on International Interests in Mobile Equipment.
Oh, rolls right off the tongue.
It does. There's also the Protocol on Matters Specific to Aircraft Equipment.
Well, you don't want general. You want it to be specific.
Yeah. This is where the convention and protocol come in. So what the Cape Town Convention does is it creates a framework that within ICAO creates a framework that allows lessors, lessees, and state actors to all have the same rules and regulations regarding who owns the planes, when they can be taken back by lessors, what lease agreements need to have as far as what needs to be in there so that everything conforms to what everyone has agreed upon. And this was concluded in 2001. And according to the ICAO website, as of 2016, there are 65 parties to the convention. India is one of them. So what should have happened, according to the Cape Town Convention, is the airline should have gone back to the lessors and said, okay, we're not a going concern anymore. And, you can take your airplanes back. And the lessors would have said, okay, we're taking our airplanes back. And that would have been the end of it. But because of the insolvency proceedings in India, Indian law has a stipulation that you can't remove assets during the insolvency proceedings, which makes sense in another business when we're talking about other businesses besides aviation, where you have assets that are movable and really need to keep moving in order to make money, make anybody money. And so what this court case was about was whether or not the DGCA in India could delist the aircraft so that the lessors could take the aircraft back. And there's hundreds and hundreds of pages in this court decision. But the one thing that I wanted to call out was the very end before the order is issued. The judge says, quote, "It is also to be considered that in the view of the delay in deregistration of the aircraft, India's compliance rating of the Cape Town Convention and Cape Town Protocol has fallen from 3.5 to 2 out of 5, which is a significant drop. This was also the first time I learned that there is a compliance rating for the Cape Town Protocol, which is, I think, neat. Compliance ratings have a long-term impact on the aircraft industry in India and also to airlines operating in India, including a significant increase in lease rental payments charged by the petitioner's lessors." So basically what the judge is saying is that everybody's lease payments are going to go up in India because Go First isn't giving the aircraft back.
Other airlines aren't going to like that too much.
Right. And so this judgment kind of sets that and says, no, the law is, we are bound by the Cape Town Convention. India is a signatory. We are bound by this. And the wanting to keep your assets because you're in insolvency proceeding does not outweigh the fact that we have international treaty obligations and you're going to ruin it for the rest of us if you continue to go down this path of not giving the aircraft back. Now, That is fascinating. It's interesting. It's all of those things, but it doesn't really matter because it's not like we can send, Nomadic and Steve and they can pick up 54 aircraft tomorrow.
It'd be a good episode, though.
It would be a good episode. Can you imagine 54 A320neos just flying out one after the other?
Gonna need a bigger crew for that one.
Exactly. But here's the problem. There's a bunch of problems. The problem is that there's a bunch of problems. Big problem, they're all powered by GTF engines.
Oh, that's not good for anyone right now.
So there's 54 aircraft in this court case that all need to have their engines serviced by Pratt. Plus, these aircraft were not stored. Like they weren't wrapped up. They weren't
parked.
They were just parked. They said, okay, we're not flying anymore. We're done. And they walked away at the end of the day. And so they haven't been maintained for flying and they haven't been maintained for storage. So there's so much work that needs to go in. And a podcast listener who's kind of familiar with the storage situation of these aircraft also mentioned the fact that the aircraft, Go First was swapping parts between aircraft that were owned by different lessors.
Uh-oh.
So it's going to be a bit of a puzzle to figure out who has which parts and where they need to go. So what's going to happen to get any of these aircraft back to the lessors so that they can then be put into play is the engines have to come off the wings. They have to be sent to Pratt, wherever Pratt has shop space for those engines. They have to all be returned to the aircraft, and then the aircraft has to be exported out of India.
So there's years of work.
Ton of work. Well, considering the fact that we're still in the 300 to 400 day range per engine for the GTF, yeah, we're looking at quite some time before some and a majority and all of these aircraft are anywhere near back to operating for an airline. We could see a new Embraer aircraft competing with the A320neo before you see the last of these aircraft.
Yikes. That's certainly one way to put it.
So it's a mess, but this is a big step for the lessors and the industry to kind of settle one of the remaining issues here. So now the hard work begins.
All right. Good luck to everyone involved. And I look forward to an episode of Steve going out there, in 6 years, reboing. How many of these airplanes were they? 50? 52?
Just in this court case, it's 54 aircraft.
Sheesh.
And there's more in the fleet.
All right. Good luck to everyone.
Yes, indeed. Luck has run out for Australian carrier Bonza, which this week said, hey, I'll take what I can get. This week said that they were attempting to evaluate, can they continue as a going concern? And then they've entered voluntary insolvency proceedings this week. They had a fleet of leased 737-8 MAX aircraft. One of them is currently operating for Canadian low-cost carrier Flair. And they had another one that was up until very recently also in Canada. And those aircraft are now going back to their lessors.
Yeah, this one may have set a world record for time between temporary ceasing of operations, hoping to return shortly, to we're done here, goodbye, there will be no refunds. I think it was 12 hours between temporary and permanently done flying. Really out of nowhere. I don't think there was much warning to passengers that anything was coming, at least with Lynx in Canada a few weeks ago. There was indication that something was happening. They gave a few days warning saying, hey, on Sunday night, we're done at midnight. Bonza was pretty much like, hey, that last flight that just landed, that was the last flight. We're done. We're done, and there are no refunds. So I don't know what credit card chargebacks are like in Australia, but in the US, this would certainly be a you're on your own situation. I hope you didn't use a debit card. Otherwise, you're completely out of luck. But man, Australia just cannot catch a break with some diversity in its airlines. You've got Qantas, you've got what's left of Virgin Australia, Rex, and that's really it. Bonza didn't really seem like it was going to stand a chance with its kind of secondary city to secondary city operation, but They tried, but Australia is pretty harsh for a lot of things. But the airline space seems to really not have any luck with getting anyone to seriously compete with Qantas.
You've got two, and you'll get two, and you'll continue to get two, and that's all you'll get.
I mean, it's like 1.5 now. Virgin Australia doesn't even fly long haul anymore since COVID. So it's really kind of like 1.5, 1 2/3. It's not great. But at least Qantas is a decent airline. But competition-wise, that's a big country to not have enough competition. But sorry to Bonza's employees and passengers. You're on your own.
Jason,
Yes.
JetBlue is reactivating A320s. Tell me more.
Not just any A320s, Ian. Its oldest A320s, including its original A320.
So we get to do that whole retirements shenanigans again?
We do.
Fantastic.
So, a report was put out by PaxX.Aero earlier this week, Seth Miller's blog.
We know them.
We do know him, that JetBlue is so desperate for airplanes, given the, yet again, we're back to the Pratt & Whitney GTF problems, that JetBlue claims to be a growth airline, but it cannot grow because it has so many aircraft parked because of the GTF problems. I mean, we talked, 2 weeks ago, that one of its A321neos, its fourth flight, had an engine failure on its first transatlantic round trip. Not great. But JetBlue is so desperate, it is reactivating up to, I believe, 12 of its oldest A320s, I believe, that were retired last year in 2023. One of them being N503JB, a.k.a. Christine, as she was known to employees. Its first aircraft delivered in 1999. I've been on that aircraft many times, but it was never really refurbished at any point in its life after like 2003. So it's got a very vintage interior that will thankfully be overhauled before it's put back into service. But that is just how desperate JetBlue is. It has bought out the lease of its oldest aircraft to press them back into service. I think they're all out in Arizona right now in one of the boneyards. But that's not a move that JetBlue is going to be alone in doing. As recently, I believe we talked about this as well, American has extended the life of its oldest A320s, which came from US Airways, which itself came from America West. And they're refurbishing the flight deck of those by actually swapping out the CRTs for newer LCD screens, which hopefully JetBlue will have planned for some of these aircraft as well. But man, desperate times call for desperate measures. But going into the boneyard to pick out the scraps that you discarded last year, that's desperate.
Yeah, good luck.
It's a sound plan for an airline that doesn't have a lot of cash to go around. It's, hey, they're already painted in the JetBlue livery. Don't even need new paint.
They don't even need new paint. You know what they could do, though? They could do what Air China and China Southern have done and order the C919. Yeah,
that's a bit dicey. Actually, I don't know. We need to check in on the certification of the C919, at least for Europe. I don't think there's any headway in the US so far, but 200 orders split evenly between Air China and China Southern coming days apart kind of feels like China's done with Boeing for the time being. These probably should have been 737 MAX orders. Both of these airlines have the MAX in their fleet, but have, between the initial groundings and delays and everything else, and then the tariff situation, they only, just like a couple months ago, started taking direct deliveries of the MAX again after years. So I don't know, maybe asking politely Air China and China Southern to order more of the homegrown C-19, probably a very logical decision.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone's surprised at this point.
No,
but
I really want to get out there.
Interesting that they came days apart.
Interesting or expected, yeah. Again, I don't think this is an order that they probably, I'm sure they wanted it, but I'm sure there was some very stern talking to saying, hey, you're going to order these, so figure it out and announce it next week. I want to fly in one of these just to see what they're like.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I don't expect to see a North American or Western European airline operating these at any point in the near future, but they have my interest.
Yeah, I can't think of any. There's a few that maybe one day I could see, but nothing in the near future.
No.
Let's go back to American Airlines and talk about what they're doing with their route network based on not 737 MAX delays, but Boeing 787 delays.
Yeah, so we can't blame Pratt & Whitney this time. I don't think. But Boeing, as Boeing does...
Why not?
I mean, we could try. Maybe we can come up with some sort of flow chart to get back to Pratt. But Boeing, of course, is late delivering 787-9s to American. The ones that were supposed to have its brand new business class cabin look very nice, but we'll have to wait a little while longer for that. But it is another instance of an airline announcing grand plans for the summer with new frequencies, new routes, new destinations that have to be withdrawn entirely or pared back. So this internal memo seems to come to us from XJohn NYC on Twitter, as it usually does. Service reductions, JFK to Rome, reduced from 2 to 1 daily, effective August 5th. JFK to Athens and Philly to Venice, both early seasonal suspension in September and October. Chicago to Paris, service suspended outright starting September 3rd, coming back next year. JFK Barcelona suspended the 3rd. And you can see the theme here that a lot of routes are either suspended early, reduced in frequency from 1 to 2 flights, but in some cases, even DFW to Kona in Hawaii will not operate this winter at all. And I posed the question on Twitter when this came out a couple of days ago. When is the last time a U.S. airline was able to announce its plans for the upcoming summer season and fly the whole damn thing? It's been a long time, I feel like, at least since before COVID. It's been at least like probably half a decade at this point where an airline said, here's what we're going to do this summer, and then they're actually able to do it. It's been a long time.
Yeah. I mean, maybe 2019? Maybe you have to go back before that? I don't know.
Maybe, but between COVID and A350 delivery delays and 787 delivery delays, like, just can any airline actually do what they say they're going to do anymore? By no fault of their own at this point for American. It's just they can only plan their route network and their fleet as the manufacturers tell them airplanes will come. But when is the last time that's actually happened? I don't know.
I don't know what to tell you, but that's a good question.
Yeah. You know what might actually come now after years and years of saying we're going to do it and putting up big plans and big physical models and even starting up a little operation would be Dubai World Central, that the other airport in Dubai that's supposed to be the new Dubai airport. It's apparently going to happen for real now.
The new Dubai airport.
The new ones. We're scrapping the old plan. We're scrapping what's there now, and they're going big. What are they doing, Ian?
So we've got a $35 billion terminal taking annual capacity up to 260 million passengers. That's a lot of passengers.
That's a lot.
5 times the size of Dubai International Airport, and all of the operations will be transferred over there. Al Maktoum will expand to 5 parallel runways with 4 operating at any one time, 4 satellite concourses, and 400 gates.
Oh, that's a number.
That is a big number.
Yeah.
70 square kilometers of airport.
Yeah, there is a sizable plot of land around the airport as it is today, which is basically a glorified cargo hub. The grand plans that they had did not come to fruition. I think there's 1 runway built right now, at least for the commercial operations. I'm looking at satellite view on Google right now. There is a second runway. I'm not sure what that one does, if anything, but there's one main... Yeah, it's just there. It's all X'd out. I don't think it's actually in operation. Maybe it is. I don't know. Maybe that's for private jets. Oh, no, that's the Emirates Flight Training Academy. Oh, there's probably some actually interesting stuff happening down there. But there are passenger flights at Dubai World Central Al Maktoum International Airport. I've actually flown out of there. I think back in 2015. It was weird. There was nobody there. It was a ghost town. But it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. I know there are plans to build up the area. For now, there are plans to build up, as Dubai does, all around it and become a mega hub in its own right. But it is not exactly as centrally located as DXB is today or connected by public transit as DXB is today. So there is a long road ahead of them. Kind of wish they stuck it more in the middle between Abu Dhabi and Dubai and they could just share one big airport.
And then just put in some high-speed rail.
Yeah, that would be great instead of having multiple redundant mega hubs like that. But they seem more real about it this time, though. Looking at the renderings, I'm not convinced the plan they have is the best plan. It looks like there's going to be a lot of walking involved in that terminal.
Yeah.
For an airline based there that is, all about connections. We don't know what's underground. Maybe they have lots of underground tunnels or whatever, but it is certainly a bigger facility than the very constrained DXB that we have today, which is remarkable in its own right that Emirates and every other airline operating out of there is able to do that with just 2 runways so closely spaced together, packed in the middle of the city. And it's a really, if they do end up eventually closing the current airport, that is a huge plot of land as well to redevelop, which is a whole other interesting aspect.
I'm sure we'll be talking much more about this as the years tick by. Now we get to talk about hot Russian planes.
Excuse me?
You heard me.
Okay. Yeah. Apparently, Russian regulators have told Russian carriers to consider cabin heat reduction in warm climates. I just find it interesting that the Russian authorities are instructing Russian airlines.
The best part about the story is that in hot places, it is hot.
It is hot. That's true.
There's a whole list of things that they should do. None of them are possible to do because you can't make outside less hot.
No. And this report apparently comes because of an incident that happened to an Aeroflot flight that was I think it was in Bangkok, or at least somewhere in Thailand.
Yeah, it was Bangkok.
Yeah, an Aeroflot A330 had an issue with one of its engines, had to go back to the gate, but they couldn't get back to the gate, and so they went to a hard stand, and they weren't allowed to run the APU because of some sort of airport regulations, so it got really hot in the aircraft. They had ground air, and if you've ever been on a big airplane parked somewhere on a very hot day, ground air just doesn't get the job done. The aircraft gets very hot. They were eventually allowed to turn on the APU, but by that time it had gotten to 31.5 degrees Celsius, which my computer right now tells me is 88.7 degrees Fahrenheit, which is very hot. And having been on some very unpleasantly hot aircraft myself last summer, that's unpleasant. I know that's unpleasant, especially if you're looking for, an 8-12-hour flight ahead of you. What I don't understand about this is they said, don't operate to places where it's hot if you don't have the equipment to operate where it's hot, where Aeroflot did. They didn't do anything wrong here. They say should not operate to hot destinations with unavailable systems, which could reduce cabin temperature control. But not only did they have an APU and a functional APU, which isn't always a guarantee, they eventually did turn it on. So I'm not really sure what they want the airlines to do, but this certainly isn't something specific to Russian airlines. This should be something that all airlines adhere to. If you don't have a functional APU, please don't send it to Miami, ever.
Yeah. We're sorry for that, Jason.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, let's get out of the heat and head north of the border and go on a bus, because Landline is now operating in Canada.
Hey, good for them. If you're not familiar, Landline is the bus operator that operates on behalf of airlines to connect major airports to smaller nearby airports that cannot and probably should not have a flight. Well, I say cannot, but they have in the past. But we're talking like here in the Northeast, you have Philly and Allentown, and Philly and Atlantic City cannot, should not ever have a flight, but you have a connecting bus opportunity, and they are booked by the airline like any connecting flight. Instead of Envoy, you're on Landline, and you're protected in case of a delay or cancellation, and Air Canada is getting in on the game. But really, really funny that Landline got a landside water cannon salute for the inaugural, I almost said flight, inaugural rollout,
bus
something
journey.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Trip. Let's say trip.
Okay, trip.
Fun stuff.
So
free car wash.
Hey, there you go. Jason, you flagged this one, so I will let you take the introduction.
Controversy. I love controversy. So we want to hear your feedback. Airbus put out a tweet yesterday, April 30th, in response to a Flight Radar 24 tweet, actually, a nice tie-in, where the Flight Radar 24 tweet said, what does a year of A380 operations look like? And you visualized for the A380's 19th birthday what 12 months of A380 operations looks like. And then Airbus quote tweeted it saying, great to see the A380 still connecting so many people on the most iconic passenger aircraft ever built. That is a spicy take. I don't even think it's Airbus's most iconic aircraft they've ever built. If you count the Concorde, I don't even think it's close to being a competition there. But yeah, write in. What do you think is the most iconic aircraft ever built? Because I don't think many people would agree with Airbus that it's the A380.
They quote tweeted our tweet, and I disagree with them.
Yeah. So, what do you think it is?
What do I think it is?
Yeah.
I don't think my love for the 747 is any secret.
I mean, personally, I think that's the correct answer. The A380 didn't shepherd in a new era of aviation in any way.
I love the A380. I think it's a fantastic airplane.
It is. And the second sentence goes on to say, still a passenger favorite with its unique cabin experience. Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. As a passenger on a long-haul flight, it is one of, if not the best aircraft to be on. But is it the most iconic passenger aircraft ever built? Absolutely not.
Yeah, I don't think that title is an earned one at this point. But yeah, podcast at fr24.com. Email us and let us know what you think is the most iconic aircraft of all time. Let's stick with commercial aircraft because there's a whole separate, military.
Yeah, we don't want to get involved in that. That's a tricky one.
That's not our business, and we don't want to go down that.
That's for another podcast.
Because I know there are strenuous thoughts on that from a lot of people, myself included. But let us know what you think, because the reactions to the tweet were also interesting. And there were some interesting contenders on there that I didn't think are iconic, but I didn't think would rise to the level of most iconic. So let us know what you think. And then continuing a theme that I thoroughly enjoy. I'm not sure how much Jason likes it.
You would.
We're going to talk about how Jason was wrong.
Technically wrong, which is the best kind of anything. Isn't
that the worst kind of wrong? If being technically correct is the best kind of correct, isn't technically wrong the worst kind of wrong? I think
you're technically correct, yeah. You might be correct. Anyway, last week we talked about a runway incursion issue at JFK, and I had said the landing aircraft are passed off to JFK ground and the aircraft taking off are still on the tower frequency. That is not correct, as let's say a pilot for a large U.S. airline who happened to operate one of my flights this year, who I won't tell you which one, but he operated one of my flights this year, which is pretty cool, wrote in and said, actually, JFK ground controllers never give clearance to cross an active runway for inbound traffic that just landed. They only give it to the outbound traffic crossing a runway that is not active. For example, when taxiing to runway 4 left, they have to cross 31 left to get there, or 22 right, and they have to cross 31 right to get there. If they use 31 left in conjunction with 4 left, blah, 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 blah. The important part, landing traffic on 4 right, 22 left stays on tower frequency before crossing the other runway. The issue is that they actually use 2 different tower frequencies for landing and departing, but they are both tower frequencies. It doesn't make it any less of a problem, but they are not on ground versus tower, but they are different frequencies. So same end result, you have the pilots who just landed on different frequency who were not hearing what's going on the departure runway, but there is a distinction between tower and ground, but the effect is the same. So
you were kind of technically wrong, but it's still a big, big thing that seems like it just shouldn't happen.
Yes, no pilot I have talked to who is familiar with this operation at JFK says this is a good thing. In this case, this particular pilot said, it blows my mind that they don't simply switch the inbound traffic to the other tower frequency. Nobody thinks this is a good thing. Operational efficiency seems to have taken too much liberty here, that the operational security of the aircraft on the ground is, we talked about this already. Doesn't matter at this point. But yes, was wrong. Technically, kind of, sort of.
But thank you to the pilot for writing in and giving us the exact details. We certainly appreciate that. If you want to write to us to enter the contest to win a copy of Scott Bateman's book, Hercules, do so. Just say, hey, I want to win the book. That's all you have to do. If you want to email us and tell us what the most iconic commercial aircraft ever built is, do that. If you want to email us and tell us what we got wrong in this episode, what we got right, what you want to see more of, what you want to see less of, or just to tell us, even technically wrong. Email us, podcast at fr24.com. And while you're emailing us, why don't you go to wherever you listen to the podcast and leave a rating and a review and tell other people stuff about this podcast. We would be ever so grateful. This has been episode 266 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick here, as always, with
Jason Rabinowitz. Thanks for listening.